Welcome to my channel, where the scariest stories come to life. Before we dive into today's chilling tale, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications, so you never miss a story. Now, let's get into the horror. This took place probably in November of 2022. Before I get into it, you need to know it's been a running joke that my cat is a skinwalker because she mimics human speech, walks upright, and has a vibe that she's far more intelligent than she should be. She's only 4 pounds and knows how good she has it for sure. It was before dawn, and I was asleep, being kept up all night by a weird screaming in the fields outside my yard. Honestly, I thought it was a fox or something at first, but it ended in a way that resembled a deer call, like the elk in Skyrim. Everyone heard and reported it, but nobody found or trapped any animal that could be responsible. The theory was that one of my neighbors was illegally keeping foxes for the pet trade on her farm, but investigations proved she had all her animals legally, and foxes were not among them. So, I was calmed out when suddenly I heard my cat meowing and screaming outside my door, clawing to enter my room. Remember when I said that she can mimic speech? Her meows often sound like human words, and it honestly kind of sounds like a child crying. I sighed and pulled a pillow over my head to drown it out, as I knew damn well she had all the fresh food she could want. Plus, I had just cleaned the litter box before going to bed. The clawing continued with the all too familiar fury and panic my cat contains. I swear you would think I abandoned her somewhere. When the clawing failed, she started making the "I am gonna puke" sounds. It honestly sounds like a drunk person groaning. I swear this cat makes every annoying sound she can to get what she wants. That got me up pretty quickly. If she's going to throw up, I knew she would do so in the center of the carpet, where my parents were sure to step. I sat up in bed, blindly groping for a housecoat and slippers, only to see that my cat was already in the room. I had not left my room all night, so I was pretty sure she was still out there. So how the hell did she get in my room? She looked at me momentarily, and I saw both fury and terror in her eyes. I whispered her name, not even I could hear, and she squeaked at me, or maybe even whimpered. That's when the meows came again, from outside my door, louder, longer, meaner. I grabbed my now snarling cat and pulled her under the bed, covering us both, while silently praying to every god and goddess I knew. Then the meows changed from meows to the sound of a long-gone, very much beloved dog I had a long time ago, but it was whimpering, complete with his claws clacking on the floor. That was the final straw for me. I rolled out of bed onto the floor and loudly said, "You are not welcome here. Leave now." My cat snarled again and threw herself at the door with everything she had. Some growls returned, but everything fell silent, except for our front door slamming shut. I pulled on the housecoat, opened my door, and was met by my father in the kitchen. He asked me if I had slammed the door and then realized I couldn't have, as he had seen me exiting my room. My mom joined us and asked what happened, and we all said we didn't know. I told him my cat was with me, because they always blamed her and me for everything that went wrong in the house. My dad was beyond furious. He had been woken up earlier than needed and stormed to my brother's room, figuring he'd been out late and came home drunk, but my brother was sound asleep, and a note left by my friend who brought him home said he was too drunk to walk himself in, on his bedside. He probably had been home since about 12:30 due to the note. However, the last line made my blood run cold. "I left your brother in his room and left right away. I couldn't find his keys to lock up behind me. I also let your cat into the house." After this event, I blessed our house several times, and thankfully, nothing seemingly has returned. But every time I hear my cat, I have to make sure she isn't already in the room with me before I go looking. Sitting on the western side of the Missouri River is Omaha, Nebraska, a large metropolis that has been Nebraska's largest city for many years. It has witnessed many historical events throughout its almost 170 years. Like many cities, Omaha had numerous ethnic neighborhoods where new immigrants settled down with people of their own kind. A section of town known for its meatpacking plants, appropriately named South Omaha, became the home of many Eastern Europeans, Poles, Czechs, Germans, Lithuanians, Slavs, Croatians, and more. However, many of these slaughterhouses closed as the years passed, changing the area forever. A few remain, but the days of massive feedlots are gone. Growing up here, I was always told stories about South Omaha and its past. Many old buildings remained as silent monuments to the old days and often mesmerized me in my youth. I wanted to see these old buildings, some old slaughterhouses, factories, and even old breweries that Omaha was once famous for. One building stood out to me, though, one of the old slaughterhouses located close to the train tracks that cut South Omaha in half. This building was massive, almost 5 stories tall and about 3 complete football fields wide. Built of brick and steel, it was a testament to the people of this city. However, I heard it would soon be demolished, and I was instantly saddened by the news. Hearing about urban exploration over the internet always piqued my interest, but I was always too nervous about trespassing. Since this building was set to be demolished, I decided to go and see it before it became a parking lot. I set out in my truck on a fantastic fall evening to see this behemoth of a building. I brought my heavy LED mag light and dressed in my hiking gear to avoid looking conspicuous. The slaughterhouse lay near the train tracks in a more deserted area of South Omaha. Surrounding it were other buildings adorned with the same red and white brick that this building also wore. Tall grasses and empty lots surrounded the building, all while a chain-link fence enclosed the entire complex of the slaughterhouse. I was prepared for this and parked some distance away on a side street near a garage. Walking toward the building, I became aware of its immense size. It was indeed magnificent and occupied a mammoth amount of space. The fence did not feature a barbed wire top, so I was able to climb over it. The moment I stepped onto the ground after the fence, I felt a strange sensation inside me, nervousness, fright, I guess both. Whatever it was, it remained with me as I proceeded on. I approached the door with a window on the side of the building. Whatever logo or name had been affixed to it before had long worn off, and the glass was covered in dirt and grime. I tried the handle, but it would not budge. The door felt loose, and I figured it could probably be opened with some force. I eventually got it open after bashing my shoulder into it, accidentally breaking the lock. Oh well, I thought, it was going to be torn down anyway. I entered the slaughterhouse and flicked on my flashlight. As I stepped into the pitch blackness, I was greeted by a large open room that featured lots of decrepit machinery, undoubtedly used for meat processing. The walls and floor were tiled, cleaning shouldn't take too long. Long conveyor belts shook and snaked through the room, strewn with dust and cobwebs. Control stations, desks, and more surrounded me. None of this, though, looked like it had been touched for many years. I made my way through the mess of machinery and dust until I reached a pair of double doors. I pushed them open slightly into another large room. But as I did, something changed. It suddenly became frigidly cold, which was odd because it was only 65 degrees outside. Sure, it wasn't hot, but it wasn't cold either, and there was no wind at all. It felt like winter had come into this room alone. I shivered but pressed on. The next room was what I presumed to be the kill floor. It had a significant main pathway for the cattle to move through, and then conveyor belts to carry them to the next station to be dressed. Living near the stockyards, I had become accustomed to the smells that emanated from this part of town. The smell that hit me as I browsed this room was on a different level, though. It was not the familiar smell of cow manure or burnt meat, but of death, decay, and disease. It was otherworldly. I had read and heard about the rotting smell lending itself to Wendigo, Skinwalkers, and the like, so I was on edge. I tried to convince myself that it was just a dead animal or something more reasonable. I continued to walk through the next room with an absolutely uneasy feeling. Suddenly, a sound like no other shook the room with great ferocity. It was the bellow of a bull, but it did not sound normal, it sounded like a cry. This was incredibly loud, shrieking as if it was about to charge. I looked around quickly to find the source of the scream, but I couldn't find anything. I continued to move through the room, finally reaching the other end. Bright, shiny tiles lay on this side of the room, with more conveyor belts and large plastic bins on wheels. As I closed in on these bins, I was in a state of absolute shock. These bins were full of bones, massive bones, obviously from cows. How could they still be here? This place had been out of operation for close to 40 years. The bones were still bloody and smelled fresh. I was about to start freaking out at this point. Honestly, I looked down and saw the floor was covered in blood from these bins. I quickly stepped back and nearly slipped on the tile. As I did this, I noticed a light from one of the doors near my end. Two red eyes appeared in the dark, and I leaned closer to see what it was. Suddenly, another loud bellow rang through the room, and those eyes got closer. I could hear hooves on the tile floor. I sprinted from my spot, bolted through the door, and made it to the other side of the room. Once through the door, I ran down a hall lined with shiny tiles, hoping to find my way out. I expected the bull to find me, or maybe just leave me alone entirely, but I was still determined. I reached the end of the hallway and approached the doorway with rubber flaps across it, like you would see at a butcher shop. I pressed through and turned to the right, but stopped dead. A faint red light bulb illuminated a workstation with multiple men cleaning a cow. They wore long white smocks, helmets, goggles, and rubber boots. One was spraying down the cow, another was cutting a part off, and the last was moving some bones to a bin. I couldn't believe my eyes. How was this possible? Did some meatpacking still take place? That couldn't be possible. There's no way. As I stepped further into the room, I heard something unusual. They weren't speaking English, it sounded almost Eastern European, maybe Polish. I remembered my grandparents speaking Polish to me occasionally, with my grandfather being full-blooded Polish. I was still in awe of what I was seeing. I needed to get past these guys to leave, so I started to move by them. I don't know how, but they heard me, and all turned to look. Everyone stopped what they were doing. 3 bespectacled men stared at me, illuminated only by the dim red light. I froze in my tracks and knew I was trespassing. One man shouted something in Polish at me and began moving my way. The others followed. I fled to the other door and sprinted as fast as possible down the hallway. I heard their footsteps behind me, but their gear must have slowed them down somewhat, because I outran them. Soon, I found an exterior door and bashed it open. I was on the other side of the slaughterhouse, but quickly found the road on the west end of the lot, leading me back to my truck. Eventually, I felt safer outside, now that I could catch my breath and walk around while doing so. I took one more glance toward the building. My legs froze at what I saw. I saw the 3 men looking at me through an open truck dock. They looked the same, except they had red glowing eyes. I began to run now, losing my mind in fear as I saw my truck up the road. Another bellow echoed through the street and hurt my ears. How could this be happening? I hopped in my car and peeled out of there. Looking in my rearview mirror, I couldn't see anything, but I was forever shaken by what I found. Never again would I explore abandoned buildings, especially those where many animals were killed. What did those men want with me? What would I have done? What was that creature? This happened at a park called Stolsoft Park, which is in my city. The whole thing is maybe a square mile in total area. Sorry, I am not too familiar with acres. It is mostly forest, with a playground facing the street on the northern end. The playground, along with the north and south entrances, is elevated. The forest gradually goes downward, meeting in a valley in the center. The swing set where I was is about 10 feet away from the fence separating one side of the playground from the forest. I usually swing there anytime between 9 p.m. and midnight, mainly because I like being the only person in the park. I'm not a curmudgeon who dislikes kids, I just prefer less crowded places in general. On this night, I believe it was around 11 p.m. when I heard shuffling behind the fence. This is not unusual, and I didn't react. Maybe 5 minutes later, I heard it again, and it sounded like something approximately human-sized. My first thought was a mountain lion. Despite the park posting signs warning of mountain lion activity, I have never actually seen one here. They don't worry me, as mountain lions usually won't attack humans unless you do something foolish, like mess with their young. I have encountered them elsewhere. They generally mind their own business. My next thought was a creeper, and I mentally prepared to jump off and run to my car. At this point, I was looking at the fence. The moon wasn't shining brightly, but it was casting a glow, giving minimal visibility at 10 feet away. I could at least see movement, especially of something of that size. As I mulled this over, I heard a sound that was not exactly a growl, but almost a moan. It lasted about 5 seconds, then I heard something moving away. The strange thing was that the movement came from quite a distance, while the vocalization came from right at the fence, 10 feet away. At this point, the sensible thing to do would have been to leave, but I was dumbfounded and continued swinging for another 30 seconds. Then, of course, it got stranger. As I was swinging, I saw a flashlight in the distance near where the playground meets the street, about 60 or 70 feet from me, with obstacles like play structures in the way. My first thought was that it was a police officer. The playground is technically closed, and they all are because of the COVID situation, but I've swung at parks after they've been closed for years. If the police cared about that, they've never bothered me. The guy came a bit closer, moving at an angle towards me. If you envision the area as a clock, I was at 6, and he started at 12, moving towards 7. There's a 20-foot by 20-foot metal overhang with a fishnet pattern table for picnics. I hopped off the swing and crouched behind it. During the day, this would be a useless hiding place, but at night, a person hiding behind it would just look like part of the shadows. I watched as he approached. While I couldn't make out any details or colors, I could see that he was dressed almost like a hunter from the show Supernatural. He wore baggy pants, a vest, and a hat, the kind with a duckbill on the front, the type they sell at Lids. He had things strapped to his arms and legs. Mind you, visibility was incredibly poor, and I may have mistaken many details. He carried a flashlight aimed at the ground with his opposite hand and looked like he had some sort of stick, like a gymnastics baton. It occurred to me that if this guy fancied himself a hunter, then a pale girl swinging at midnight was probably the worst thing to be. This situation now seemed potentially dangerous. If this person got close, I decided to run for the far fence leading into the forest. Between me and my car, despite the small size of the forest, it would be impossible to find a person hiding in it at night, even with a flashlight. I'm very familiar with the forest. I have been coming here since I was 7 or 8 years old. Even in complete darkness, I could navigate well enough to hide if I had to. As I crouched down, the person stopped briefly, then continued down into the forest entrance. That's basically the end of our encounter. I waited a few minutes, and then tried to see if I could still spot him. I'm not sure if the two events were related at all. As far as the noise I heard, I know what mountain lions sound like. The only other fauna in the park are deer, squirrels, and insects. I honestly do not know if this was a skinwalker or anything like that. All I heard was the sound, there was no smell, and I didn't get a terrible feeling from that person with the flashlight, even though they were dressed oddly. Also, I don't think this forest would be big enough to house something like that, but maybe it could be just big enough for something to stop by for a few days. We do have a good-sized forest farther up in the mountains, called Hubbard Park. You have to travel about 20 minutes through the suburbs to get there, but I don't think it would be impossible for a skinwalker to bounce between these two locations. Thanks for sticking around till the end. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to give the video a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a terrifying tale. See you in the next one.